Welcome back to Solo Adventures! My name is Livy and I'm here yet again with another BGG Solitaire PnP game review. So today the game we're going to be looking at is Zer0-X, a game about being an alien race attempting to maintain the status quo. So as usual, if you're not interested in actually watching me play this game, you can feel free to skip to the end to hear my final thoughts. Otherwise, let's venture forth. Alright, so here we are, mostly set up for a game of Zer0-X. So I'm just going to explain what I did. The instruction book will give you specifics about how to set up the trackers for each race. As you can see, each of the races has a different goal that they want to obtain, and if any of them reaches this goal, then we lose. So the object of this game is to prevent the 4 other races from achieving their goals for 8 turns. When we begin, we have 2 of each resource cube on our action cards. And we have 2 of each player resource card in our starting hand. So no matter what, you're always going to have 10 cards in your hand. No more, no less. These are the research cards. You deal them out so there's 5 visible at a time. And here we have the cube supply with these dice as trackers showing us how many of these dice we add to our draw bag every turn. So I'll give you just a quick rundown of what each of these races wants to do. So the Rizben are a race of aliens who are really into research, so they're really good at researching. And if they get 3 specific research cards that they're looking for, then they win. The Gifters are a warlike race, and they want everybody to have as much military as possible. So they're very good at getting troops rather quickly, and if at any point they have 12 troops, or if combined everybody has 18, then the Gifters also win. The Yenim really like to trade, and their objective is to trade 4 times with each of the other races. And the Leards are into diplomacy, and their diplomacy track goes up every time that another race uses a diplomacy action. So if they can make it to level 7 diplomacy, then they win. So I think the best way to start getting into this game is to just get started. I will let you know that this can be quite a long game. I don't know if I'm going to play the whole thing because it can go for 2 or 3 hours if you really want to think hard about your decisions. So I'll just go for a while so you get the idea of how things flow. And also, of course, we have our round marker on turn 1. So something you're definitely going to want to have when you play this game is this spreadsheet. You're going to want to have it to reference throughout the different phases, and I have played this game a few times, but I still really need to look at this sheet. Alright, so first we begin with the round start, and we fill the initial cubes. And what that means is that we put the same number of cubes as we have displayed here into our draw bag, or in this case it's a cup. So 1 red, 2 yellow, 1 green, and 1 blue. Then we reveal an event card. Refugees. Unless all races have at least 1 of each trade and diplomacy cubes, a player must discard their trade and diplomacy cubes down to 1. So nobody has trade and diplomacy cubes yet, so I have to get rid of 2 of mine. But that could have been much worse. So now the research cards would trigger if anybody had any, but nobody does. And now we deal ourselves 5 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I can use these cards to purchase cubes. So I can purchase cubes twice per turn in 2 different phases. By the way, I know that my fingers are inky. I could not get the Sharpie off of them. I had to color some of these cubes, so it's a little bit embarrassing, but that's why I have inky fingers like a little kid. Anyway, so every time you gain cubes, you have to pick only 1 resource. So in this case, I have 2 yellow research cards, and I have a focus for that, so I can get +1 cube for every 2 same resource cards. So that means I get 3 research cards, or 3 research cubes, pardon me. And we put these in the discard. So we get 3 research cubes, but seeing as how the other races are all watching to see what we're doing, they're going to be influenced by our actions, so we also put 3 of these cubes in the cup as well. So after all of that's done, we begin dealing out these cubes randomly in a clockwise fashion, starting with the starting player. So the starting player is always the one in the upper left, and these cards are shuffled and randomly assigned at the beginning of the game. So they have a military, a research, another research, diplomacy, trade, research, research. Okay, so I'm allowed to take my actions at any time, but the races are only able to take their actions when it's their turn, basically. And the cost for actions and the actions I can take are here on these cards. So for example, if I want to spend 2 blue cubes, I can plus or minus any one race's victory track. I can move it up or down. Or I could spend my 2 military cubes and prevent any of these races from using one of their research cards, for example. Now the other races have different things that they're good at. So for example, the gifters can only do a research action if they have 3 yellows, but the Risbon can do a research if they have 2, but the Illyrids can only do a research action if they have 4. So every race has its own strengths and weaknesses in that regard. So I don't really think I want to take any actions right now. We'll begin the race actions, so we start going clockwise from the starting race. So they can't take a research and they can't do a military, so they're done. The gifters can't research or trade, so they're done. Yenem doesn't have enough, also not enough, and also not enough. So pretty uneventful turn. Now we move into the second player phase, so we deal back up to 5 cards. And then we can spend again. So I want 3 diplomacy cubes. I'll put them here. And then I have to put the 3 diplomacy cubes in the cup. Then we basically refresh everything, we refill the research cards if anybody bought anything, and now we can focus our cards. So I can decide what kind of actions I want to take. Let's say I want more trade. I can take 2 cards out of here. Let's say I'll get rid of 1 focus and 1 research to get 2 trade cards. Or how about 1 trade and 1 diplomacy? You can never have more than 10 cards, but you can have up to 5 of any kind of card in your deck at a time. So that's the focus action. And we have to shuffle them, of course. We move the starting race pawn clockwise, and we advance the round marker to 2. Okay, so now we're back at the beginning, so we are filling the initial cubes. So we go 1 red, 2 yellow, 1 green, and 1 blue. And let's see what the event is. A black hole. Player loses 1 cube from each player resource card. So that's not great, but we can deal with it. Research cards would trigger if there were any. And now I get to deal out my cards again. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want, how about I want military? I'll take 3 military cards. 3 military cubes, pardon me. So I have my 3 here. But I also have to put 3 in the cup. And that's that. Kind of mix up the cubes a little bit, and then we begin dealing clockwise, starting with the gifters this time. And now the races take their actions. So the gifters, I believe you do all the actions from the top down. They can't research, but they can do their military action because it costs only 2 cubes. So their special ability is they can gain 2 troops for every 1 military action. So the other races only get 1 troop per military action, but they get 2. So now they have 4. But they can't do anything else. So let's see Yenem. Yenem can research. And the races will always choose the first card left to right that has their color, basically. So Yenem is going to spend their 3 research cubes and get replicators. So it says, if this race has no cubes in any track, then plus 1 cube to 1 track. So this will trigger later, and this doesn't trigger until it says so in the flowchart, so we don't have to worry about that quite yet. And they can't do anything else. Alright, the Illyrids can take a diplomacy action, because that only costs them 2. So when a race takes a diplomacy action, that means they gain immunity for the next turn. So this means that I can't interfere with them, basically. But in the case of the Illyrids, then their diplomacy track also goes up 1. And yes, of course, if they get up to 7, then they win. And we end with the Risben, who cannot do anything at this point. So now we refill back up to 5 cards. And I can decide what I want. I'll take 2 blue. And let's mess with something. Let's see. I don't like that the gifters already have this many troops. It's a little bit concerning because they only need 12 to win, so I can spend 2 of these cubes to bump them down 1. And let's spend another 2 to bump them down again. So now they're back to only 2 troops. I think that I also want to prevent the Yenem from triggering their ability, because I don't want to I don't want them to get free resources, basically, so I'll spend 2 of my military cubes there. And I'll hang on to the rest of this. And now we basically refresh and get ready for the next round. I don't think I'm going to adjust my deck, so I don't need to focus. Move the pawn, and advance the track. And then we remove 1 Occupy or Immune cube if anybody has one, and the Illyrids do have one, so they are no longer immune. If you occupy a race, that means that they cannot get cubes for 1 turn, and that costs 3 military cubes for me. So then we begin by filling the initial cubes again, so 1 red, 2 yellow, 1 green, 1 blue. And we deal back up to 5. That is a lot of trade cubes. How about that? I'll take 3 trade. Oh, I forgot to reveal the event card. It goes event card, and then I can spend my cards. Ancient Derelict Ship. Give the first race to take a research action and additional available research card. It's okay, my doing things a little out of order didn't interfere, so that's alright. And now we begin distributing the cubes again. And let's take our race action. So we start with Yenem. They'll take a diplomacy and be immune this turn. And the Illyrians increase their diplomacy by 1. And they will take a trade action. So the way that trading works is that when any race trades, they're trying to trade for basically their own color. So Risbon is going to trade for yellow, Gifters will trade for red, and Yenem will basically trade whatever other cubes they have to other races to get more green. But in this case, they have no resources really, so they cannot trade. Ah, but I was wrong. This goes into effect because we blocked it one time, so now it can trigger this time, and this would have triggered right after the event card. So it says, if this race has no cubes in any tracks, then add 1 cube to 1 track. So I can decide then what track I want it to have. Let's put it on, let's give them 1 diplomacy. So then the way that you trade is you look for the next race that has the most cubes, basically. And the most cubes that they want. So in this case, it would be the Gifters. So first they would have to trade for whatever color they would want, basically. But now we can trade for another color. So we will spend the 2 green trade cubes to trade 1 diplomacy for 1 trade. And this increases their trade agreement level with the Gifters by 1, so they're now on 2. And so Yenem's done, and the Illyrians can't really do anything. Risbon also not. The Gifters can take a research action. So this event says, give the first race to take a research action an additional available research card. So they will automatically take the red one, which is very concerning because this card has the passive effect of they get +2 troops when they're generating troops. So they are getting even more troops even more quickly than usual. And then since they get an additional research card and there's no more red ones, we just go left to right. So then they get the AI assistant. So if research track is empty, then +1 research cube. So this doesn't trigger quite yet, but it will a little later on. And that's everybody. So I will shuffle my deck up again. And then I'll deal. And now I can spend. So I think I want 3 diplomacy. And 3 goes in the cup. And I can spend 2 of my diplomacy cubes to take 1 cube away from any of these races. But instead I think I'm going to spend my research cubes, these 3, to get this card. So the action that the aliens can take when they have this card will be on the top, and the one that we can take when we have this card is on the bottom. So our ability is if any race has surplus research cubes, then you gain 1 research cube. And surplus is when they have cubes that are in the dotted boxes. I took a marker and went around the outside of the solid yellow boxes because it's a little bit tricky to see from this angle. But yeah, I have this here. So now the research cards or events would trigger. So if research track is empty, then +1 research cube. Yep. If this race has no cubes in any tracks, then 1 cube to 1 track. I will give them 1 military. Then I could focus my cards if I want, but I don't want to. And we move the starting pawn over, and we advance the round marker. So now we're on round 4. So I think that you can probably get an idea of how this game works. I think I've showed every mechanic so far. But yeah, as you can see, this can be quite a long game if you really want to spend a lot of time thinking about all of your actions. So in any case, what are my thoughts on this game? Let's talk about it. So as usual, we're going to begin by discussing the build for this game. So the build for this game I would call medium. It's not exactly, I wouldn't call this a heavy build exactly. So there are a decent number of cards, and it will take a little time to make these, but you're really also going to have a lot of cubes for this game, because I'm thinking that most of the other markers that you could potentially have won't fit quite as nicely on the race cards. I think this game was clearly designed with cubes in mind, and that cubes are really the best way to get the best experience from this game. You're going to need to have at least 4 different colors of cubes, and I would recommend that you have about 30 of each color, although you could potentially use an infinite number of them, as the rules do point out. So I think the visual style and the artwork for this game it's nice. The resource cards are a little bit plain, but the research cards are quite nice and they have decent artwork. And I also really like how each of the different races cards has a portrait that I think was made especially for this game. They look very similar to their prototype counterparts, and the colors, of course, match up with their cubes. I think that they look really nice and they really serve the game well. Now, Zer0-X is unique because it's basically the opposite of a 4X game. So 4X games are exploit, explore, expand, and exterminate. And in this game, what you're trying to do is just stop everybody else from doing any of these things. Thus, it is a Zer0-X game. Really, all that you are trying to do as this particular alien race is you're just trying to get in everybody else's way just enough to stop them from making progress on the projects that they want to complete. Usually in games, we're attempting to be extremely proactive to achieve a specific goal or objective, but in this case the objective is to stop other people from gaining their objectives, and we win as long as they don't. I feel like our alien race is kind of the equivalent of some kind of galactic grumpy cat or something, where we just say no to everything. So the game looks nice and the theme is pretty nice, but how does it play? So I found this game a little bit complicated to get into. It took me quite a while reading the rules to really understand the flow of this game. And I think this is partly because the rulebook could be written a little bit better. I feel like it feels a little bit vague. Things could maybe... I think the rulebook could benefit from maybe some more specific examples. And in general, it's a little bit hard to grasp at first. I did eventually get there, and then it all makes total sense to me, but it was a little hard to learn. A mechanic that I really like in games is bag building, and so I appreciate that this game has it. I enjoy that basically the other alien races are going to be kind of copying what you're doing, and so you put an equal number of cubes for the color that you purchased basically into the bag that will then be distributed among the other alien races. So if you try to boost up your military, the rest of the galaxy will try to boost their military, and that is an enjoyable balancing act. In general, I would say that I liked the gameplay, and I think it takes a decent amount of strategy to really win. I found this game really tricky, and I think I'm going to need to play it multiple more times before I can even come close to winning, which is, in my opinion, a good thing. So let's touch on a few points of criticism here. First off, we of course have the difficulty with learning this game and understanding the rulebook, but we also have the problem of a certain amount of fiddliness that occurs as the game wears on. So as the different races get more and more of these research cards, each of them have more and more abilities that they can use. And it can get a little bit tricky to remember to trigger them all, or to remember what all of them do and how they interact with one another. I think it's really easy to forget the effects of some of the race's research cards, let alone your own abilities with the research cards that you purchase for yourself. So I think that this is really the hardest part of the game, is just trying to keep all of these research abilities in order. All in all, I liked Zer0-X. I think it's a little bit complicated, and that the playtime can be somewhat long, especially if you really are trying very hard to win. I can easily see this game taking more than 2 hours if you really want to put thoughts into your moves. If the somewhat complicated overlapping research powers doesn't really bother you, and you have enough cubes, then I would suggest that you give Zer0-X a try. You might like it. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, then please subscribe because it would really help out the channel. If you'd like to help support the channel, then you can check out my Patreon, and you can always check out the Facebook group for all things solo gaming. So until next time, friends, happy adventuring.